Welcome to a quick discussion of Tunic. This is one of my favorite games of the year, so now that it's been announced for additional platforms, I thought this would be a good time to highlight it and talk about what makes it so special. Tunic is very Zelda-inspired at first glance. We have the little green tunic. We also wake up on a beach, very reminiscent of Link's Awakening, but it's actually a pretty unique game. So it's really hard to talk about what makes Tunic so great without getting into spoilers, so I will quickly say that if you haven't played the game, I would actually recommend trying to play it with as little knowledge as possible. Just know that it's very much a top-down Zelda-inspired game with a lot of unique flair that makes it stand out. But for a more detailed explanation, I really like a lot of the concepts of this game. It is very, very Zelda-inspired, but actually has a lot of unique aspects of its own that actually sets it apart. And in some ways, I think it improves upon classic Zelda games. One very unique aspect of the game is its language. So we got a stick, but the text is not actually in English. A lot of the writing in this game actually isn't in English. So that's part of the appeal of it, actually, is trying to figure out things on your own, because the game does explain some things to you, but it's actually generally a little bit indirect, and I actually like that. It's sort of a callback to like the original Zelda for like NES, where you have very little instruction within the game itself, and you have to rely on like the manual to figure everything out. So it's very Zelda-inspired in terms of combat as well. We have a lock-on with the left trigger, and we can equip our stick to any of the main face buttons except A, which is used to dodge. That does use stamina. Whenever we get a shield, that will also use stamina, but attacking doesn't use stamina. So I've seen a lot of Dark Souls comparisons, as is the case with a lot of games nowadays with this type of combat system. But because attacking doesn't use stamina, I do feel like this is a little bit more forgiving. There are also accessibility options, so you can actually toggle like infinite stamina and things like that. So if you want to play the game, like if this looks great to you, but you don't necessarily want the full challenge of a Souls-like game, you can toggle accessibility options so you can get the experience without all the frustration, potentially. Even as someone who's not really good at Souls games, I've played a little bit of Bloodborne and a little bit of Dark Souls 2, and that's about it. But I have played several Souls-like games, like Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, which I actually think, because of the stamina system, this game actually has more in common with that. Even as someone who's pretty bad at Souls-like games, I actually did find this to be relatively manageable. Obviously, it's a little bit challenging, but not too bad. Certain bosses definitely took me a long time. Like Dark Souls, we have these little statues. These are used as essentially save points, but they also reset every enemy on the overworld. So there's a bit of a risk versus reward. It heals you, it allows you to save as a checkpoint, but there is the problem of every enemy coming back. We have a key here. It asks us if we want to pick it up, I assume. So we'll just say okay to that. We also have these little bushes in the way. Because we have a stick and not a sword, we actually can't chop those down yet. We have a lot of enemies over there, and a little glowy collectible. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, Tunic is a very charming game. Like, graphically, it is very charming. I'm trying to figure out the word for it. I don't think it's minimalistic per se. Maybe stylized would be a good word for it. But it's very appealing in that it has a sort of old school aesthetic in a way. Like a lot of the like various objects are like not super detailed in a way that actually I think is sort of like charming in its simplicity, if that makes sense. We can open up this door now to see what's behind here. Once we enter here, we have our first major collectible. So the main gimmick of Tunic and what makes this game so special, or one of the things that makes this so special, is, you know how I was talking about Zelda, how in the old days, like for Zelda 1, you had to basically consult the manual for a lot of things? This game harkens back to that. So our main collectible are pieces of an instruction manual for the game we're currently playing. Not everything is in English, a lot of things are in the like runic language that we've seen already, but we do have some like context clues and these little cute illustrations that kind of like tell us the information without directly telling us the information. So I think this is actually really well done. So yeah, gradually you'll find the different pieces of the instruction manual, and they basically give you clues of how to progress, and also give you hints for like secrets and things. There are tons of secrets around this overworld. So yeah, in general, I do really like this game a lot. In terms of like 2D versus 3D Zelda games, I've always preferred 3D Zelda games because I started with games like The Wind Waker, and then I played like, you know, Minish Cap and A Link to the Past a little bit later. But even as someone who's not necessarily the biggest fan of top-down Zelda games, I really like Tunic. Again, I think it has enough charm that even at a first glance, it looks very much like a Zelda clone. It has its own identity in a way that I actually really respect. It basically takes this sort of basic framework of like, hey, let's make a Zelda-like game with a little cute fox protagonist, with a little green tunic, and then it just kind of has a lot of its own ideas and ways that are actually very impressive while sort of building on and subverting the genre. Like with the in-game manual, it's playing off of the idea of how important manuals used to be in games. It also kind of plays off the idea of this being a digital game, and thus it doesn't have a physical manual, so you have to like collect it in the game, which is also very clever. Yeah, each page will basically give you various like information, but again, like in this case, a lot of this is not necessarily in a language we can read, but there's also some interesting details, like even telling you page numbers for things that we haven't actually found yet. So, like, you can basically figure out everything by context because of the pictures and illustrations in most cases, like left trigger is lock on, right trigger is shield, right bumper is like healing potions, and equipable items are to X, Y, or B. But something that isn't necessarily obvious right away is what the A button does. So A rolls, but you can also hold A to run. The cool thing about this to me is you actually can run this entire time, but the game doesn't tell you until you find that page, and then it's like, oh yeah, I could run. You have a lot of abilities by default, but you don't know you have the abilities until you actually find the corresponding pages. So yeah, the game basically does a really good job of unveiling information when it's needed. So this is the case for a lot of pages. A lot of them correspond to things you're just about to do in the world. And I do feel like it's set up in a way that is actually very organic, where as soon as you basically need a piece of information, the game is willing to give it to you. Even though you technically, like, if you already knew about this, then you could have been running all this time, basically. And that applies for some other things as well, where it's like, if you knew about this in advance, you could have been actually using this ability this whole time, but the game doesn't tell you until, like, it's actively needed or helpful. For example, these little gold pedestals, there are ways to interact with those, but we actually don't find that out until we find the corresponding page. So again, this is one of those things where you might see and think, what do I do with this? And then you can actually interact with it this entire time. It's just a matter of learning how to interact with it. So here's our little combat tutorial of sorts, also telling us about iframes when rolling. So when there's a little dust cloud when rolling, that means we're invulnerable. We can also attack without stamina, so again, that's one of the good things about this game to me as someone who's bad at, like true Souls-like games. The lack of attacking stamina is a big deal for me personally. So yeah, it's kind of a hybrid of a bunch of different gameplay styles, but it manages to stay very unique and have a lot of its own like feel to it, to the point where even though it's very much drawing inspiration, it still is very unique in its own right. And I actually really like when indie titles do that, by the way. A lot of games do this, where they basically take the framework of like, let's make a game inspired by X or Y or Z, and then the original concept of let's make a game inspired by this ends up basically evolving to the point where it has its own identity and own like mechanics, to the point where it's like inspired by, but is also somewhat like detached from the original idea, but in a good way that makes it stand out as really unique. I think that's one area where Tunic really excels, being like you can very much tell that it is an homage, but it also has a lot of its own concepts that are actually really clever, and unfortunately, it's hard to talk about because a lot of the really clever ideas are things that are spoilers, and again, this game is actually pretty easy to spoil, all things considered, because of how much is told through the manuals. One really cool detail in this early part of the game, since we can't cut these down because we don't have a sword, we can actually kind of guide the enemies into cutting them down for us, which is actually really clever. In a way, I almost feel like this is slightly reminiscent of something like from last year, Metroid Dread, and how that game doesn't give you the morph ball until really late into the game relative to most Metroids. I don't think Tunic is as extreme with that, in all fairness, but it has a similar kind of setup where basically, in most Zelda games, your sword is like your first weapon, like your first main item. But Tunic doesn't give you a sword right away, so you have to kind of find roundabout solutions around not actually having a sword yet. And I actually find that really clever. Yeah, I don't think it's too long of a wait, but it is, I feel like, longer than usual for like a Zelda-like game. By the way, I'm pretty sure this game was made by primarily one person. This game was actually announced at Xbox's E3 2018 conference, if I'm not mistaken, and I remember being immediately sold on the game by the premise of a fox in a Zelda-like. It looked really adorable. The game actually isn't as adorable as it looks because, lo and behold, it is kind of a Souls-like, which is not necessarily my preferred genre. Yeah, artistically, it is still very cute in how it's set up, but it's also very difficult. So I actually almost feel like, coincidentally, because of when this game originally came out, it almost is kind of like Kirby in some ways, where it looks really cute on the surface and it's not necessarily... it has a lot of depth beyond that, which I actually like. Yeah, this game came out, I want to say, March 2022 for Xbox One and Series X, and Series S, and also released for PC via Steam, I think. I don't know if it's on the Epic Games Store, but at the time of recording this, a PS4 version was just announced. And also PS5. That's coming out in September. At the time of recording this, a Switch version has not been announced, but I have a feeling it'll probably happen at some point. I hope it comes out on Switch. I would actually probably play it again on Switch, to be honest, because I feel like this game would fit really well with like a portable setup. You might be noticing I'm actually not fighting much, and that is because I'm not good at Souls-like games, so this is definitely a case where I tend to avoid combat whenever possible. Whenever I do have to fight an enemy like a boss, I tend to struggle a bit, But overall, other than the sort of trial and error with attack patterns, I do feel like this might not even be a bad introduction to the concept of Souls-likes, because it's kind of like, it is difficult, and you do have like the respawn mechanics of a Souls game, but because of the stamina system, it's a little bit more forgiving. I say that as we're about to fight a very tough enemy, the guard captain. So, to tell the truth, it is actually very difficult to fight enemies at this low level state. There is a level up system, by the way, but I don't have any items. That also messed me up at first. I didn't realize you could actually level up at the beginning, so I actually went a long time without actually leveling up any stats, and that definitely did not go particularly well. Yeah, it's coming out on PlayStation in a couple months. I highly recommend it. Again, this is like top 3 favorite games of the year. Admittedly, at the time of recording this, I've only played 2 new games, or 3 new games, both, or 2 of which were from March. But yeah, this is top 2 for me. I don't know if it's my absolute favorite, partly just because I'm not the biggest fan of the combat mechanics. But in terms of like world design and charm and just overall like style, I do think this game is really amazing. It definitely deserves a lot of attention, to be honest. I almost feel like it got overshadowed because of being a console exclusive to Xbox for 6 months, and also it is on Steam, admittedly, but I almost feel like yeah, exclusivity kind of limited how much it stood out originally, and then also releasing not too far away from games like Kirby and Elden Ring definitely didn't do it any favors. But now that's getting a re-release, I hope that sort of re-energizes the game. It's one of those games where it's like, it's a little bit niche at this point, and I really hope that coming out on more platforms, again, at this point, it's only been announced for PS4, but that doesn't mean it will only be on PS4. Like, I think a Switch version is possible, and it could be announced by the time this video goes live, for all I know. But yeah, I do highly recommend this game. Oh, there's an item, I think. So yeah, we have a couple of items, we can equip these as well. We also have like 1 of 3 of something, but we don't know what that is. We also have the little hexagon thing next to where our money and our little 1 out of 3 collectibles are. We also have this little, you know, question mark space. So there are a lot of mechanics, and yeah, the game doesn't tell you until you actually like need to know, basically. Sometimes they tell you a little bit after you need to know, but that's part of the mystery of it, is trying to collect all the pages, learning about the world and controls even, and gameplay just by pure context and not really having anything told to you directly. Like, this is as close as we get, and even then, this is not like, you know, up front because of this not necessarily being in English in a lot of cases. Like, we can read some of this, but not all of it, to the point where we do have to genuinely figure out a lot on our own. But that is part of the appeal of this game, is trying to unravel the mystery behind it, which is why I say it's best experienced with as little knowledge of the overall scope of this game as possible. So it makes it a little bit hard to convey what makes it so special, but this was a little quick look at the game. If you liked what you saw, I highly recommend it when either on the current platforms it's on, or when it gets re-released on more platforms. Again, this is one of my favorite games of the year. I cannot recommend it enough, and I hope more people experience it. But on that note, thank you for watching, and I hope you'll join me next time for another discussion.